Now, we continue this afternoon to celebrate the life of the late U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her relationship with our country. And we're joined now by former Constitutional Court Judge Albie Sachs. A very good afternoon to you, Judge Sachs. So great to have you with us. Now, I am quite aware that over the past few days since the passing of Ms. Ginsburg, that you've been talking ever so fondly about her and the relationship that you've enjoyed with her. If you could just give us an idea of how the two of you met and how you became thick as thieves.
Yes, we met actually at the Supreme Court. I was on the court in South Africa and visiting, giving some lectures in the United States. And I was invited by Justice Stephen Breyer, who's one of Ruth's colleagues on the court, who was very interested in architecture. And he supervised the building of an extremely beautiful Court of Appeals in Boston. And he was advising us on putting up our wonderful building on Constitution Hill. And he invited me over for tea, and I came for tea, and he introduced me to his colleague, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And we just hit it off straight away. This would have been about 15 years ago. And then whenever I went to Washington, she wouldn't allow me to be in that city without coming to say hello. She'd always show me off to her law clerks. And through me, she would talk about the South African Constitutional Court. So I said, Ruth, why don't you and Marty come and visit us? And sure enough, about 10 years ago, she and her husband came on a visit sponsored by the U.S. State Department to the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg. We flew down to Cape Town. She spoke at UCT. We spent a wonderful, wonderful week together. And I'd just like to say that her late husband, Marty, who died about 6 or 7 years ago, was a superb supporter of Ruth, who often stayed home, looked after the children, allowed her career to get ahead because he just knew how brilliant she was and how unfair it was that women with brains and sharpness and expertise like her weren't able to get ahead.
And certainly you highlight some of the issues that were so passionate and that she was so passionate about, issues of women's rights. What would you say are some of the legacies that she leaves behind? Because she's been described in so many ways by so many.
You know, it was women's rights. So that was central to everything that she did. But it was the rights for people, for all the groups that were being held back because they were who they were, who were marginalized, dispossessed. Obviously, the issue of race cropped up very, very strongly. Some of the most powerful dissents were against decisions by the Supreme Court to turn back laws that made it easier for black people to get onto the voters' roll. Issues like that, the homeless, the poor, the marginalized, immigrants, all of those issues. But she was famous not just for that, it was for her persona. I remember the last time I visited her, it was about 18 months ago, and you know, that picture of the Supreme Court, those grand steps in front with all the columns and so on, that's not how you get into the court. They're there just for show. For security reasons, you go around the side, and then you pass a bookshop. And the person escorting me showed me in the window of the bookshop 50–60% of the books were about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, not about George Washington or the present Chief Justice, about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, another 20–30% about Sonia Sotomayor. And there was something about Ruth. I said to her, Ruth, how do you feel? Suddenly you're famous. She said, you know, Albie, I'm the same person. I wasn't particularly prominent. The person who's made me famous is Donald Trump. She said it very modestly about herself. She said that she didn't go into the adjectives herself. I fill them in because she was modest, because she was empathetic, because she had a strict feeling for truth. She was a tiny person, just 5'1". I still measure things in the old English ways of measuring. Very, very tiny. Had a soft voice. She wasn't charismatic at all. But people loved her because she wasn't bombastic. She didn't show off. She didn't say, look, I'm the smartest, I'm clever, I know everything. Very focused And people rallied around her because she was so vulnerable, because what lived inside her was just that spirit of dignity and decency and rationality that many, many people felt were being smothered in her country. At the personal level, she was exceptionally friendly.
Judge Sachs, you know, oftentimes when people end up being proponents for human rights, they themselves have been marginalized in one way or another. What do you know, perhaps, her background and some of the key things in her life that led her to be so vigilant and so violently protective of those who have had their rights trampled upon?
I think she came from what they call broadly a sort of liberal, progressive background. Family from Jewish immigrants who had fled from persecution in Russia. Every Easter time, the Cossacks would come up to the villages and say, the Jews killed Christ, we're going to kill the Jews, and the people would hide in the cellars, go into the forests. So there was a background of persecution was part of it. And growing up in a sort of lower middle class Brooklyn family, being smart, very, very clever, being one of the very first women students at Harvard University. You see the picture of their final year class, and it's men, 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 and one little woman in the corner. I think they're like 5 out of 400. And finding when she graduated with the best degrees possible, she couldn't get a job. The stupid guys could get jobs. They had connections. They just didn't want to employ women. So she felt in her skin, in herself, what it was like. Even although you had the highest degrees from the most advanced university, being a woman, you just couldn't get a simple job. And she made that her vocation, to fight for the rights of women, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Very shrewd, very careful, choosing her cases. She herself argued 5 cases in the Supreme Court. She won 4 of them. And sometimes she even used discrimination against men to establish the gender equality principle. Very strategic, very focused, very intelligent. And then when Clinton became the President of the United States, he chose her as the second woman judge on the court.
Now, Judge Sachs, tell us about the relationship that she had with the South African Constitution. You have called her an ally of the South African Constitution, and many times she has cited our Constitution as perhaps the benchmark for others to follow in compiling their own.
You know, she came through in 2 ways. One is she just loved our court, the artwork, the building, the feeling of its African feel and quality, and openness and humanity, and she loved the decisions that came from our court. But the other is she loved our Constitution. And after the uprisings in Egypt, where they overthrew the Mubarak regime, she was invited there and to advise them on what they could learn from the American Constitution. And she shocked many Americans when she said, don't look to our Constitution, look to the Constitution of South Africa. Our Constitution is 200 years old. South Africa's got a new contemporary Constitution, very, very progressive. You'll get more from that. She got hate mail. She was threatened with treason for simply making that point. She wrote a beautiful preface to the book that we brought out on art and justice, dealing, in fact, I can hold it up. I'm not sure if your cameras can...
Art and Justice. Yes, yes.
Yes.
There you go.
And it's got a preface by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, half a page, speaking about the court, not just the building, but what the South African court stands for and the South African Constitution. So she loved the building. She loved what we were trying to do in South Africa, and she felt very, very close to our Constitutional Court, as many of us feel very, very close to people like her in the United States who have a similar vision, who fight racism and sexism, homophobia in their own countries, and who fight for dignity and honesty. There's a great affinity between people like her and people like ourselves.
And before I let you go, Judge Sachs, Immediately, almost immediately, when she passed away, President Trump was already talking about getting her replacement, and he has just announced that he will be officially announcing who her replacement is. Just your thoughts on the pace of things, the fact that her replacement is being announced even before she is 6 feet under, and perhaps what her preferences would have been in a situation such as this.
Well, I don't want, for reasons almost of protocol, to comment on preparations for the court in the United States. But I will say this, that it's extremely troubling to me and worrying, the sharp divisions in that court. It's not a court of the nation for the nation. It's a divided court. It was Lincoln who said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And people are chosen for the court on which side are you on, not on your faithfulness to the broad principles of the Constitution. And it set a very, very negative example. And hopefully we in South Africa will never go that way. We'll never have this unseemly pressure, particular people in power at a particular moment to get particular people onto the court. It's reducing the prestige of the court inside the country, United States, and certainly internationally. It was a court that everybody looked to for providing brilliant, thoughtful, visionary decisions. Today, nobody looks to that court. I'm sorry to say that, because there's some brilliant judges on that, a very distinguished Chief Justice, but people, it's just lost its prestige, and I fear that its prestige is going to go even lower now. I say that with great regret.